right, Richard, good morning. It's great to catch up and start talking a little bit. And I look forward to sort of digging into your background and talking about aviation. And we can share it with, share sort of the future you've got planned with VERIJET along with your background and what we've got going on with Coflyt as well. And just look forward to a great conversation.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so for everybody that doesn't know, Richard has a deep background in aviation. I'm going to ask him to dig into that a little bit as well. He sits on the board of Coflyt. He's also the founder of VERIJET, which is something we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about as well. And so a lot of exciting aviation knowledge that we can share. So, Richard, why don't we get started? I mean, we'll talk a lot about aviation, but just give I know you had a little bit of time in telecommunications industry. So let's talk about that briefly, and then we'll sort of talk about how that folds into aviation going forward. That works.
Certainly. In the mid-'80s, you had regional long-distance carriers, and they would compete with AT&T MCI, but they couldn't make coast-to-coast calls. We pulled them together in something called the National Telecommunications Network, or NTN, and positioned them to compete with AT&T and MCI. This is part of the reason now that long distance is almost free. In doing that, we ended up getting acquired. So I was with Microtel, TELUS, Teltec, ATC. Eventually we became WorldCom, bought MCI. Along the way, my team and I were sold as indentured servants to Ross Perot at EDS, which turned out to be a great move. We got to take technology built for these smaller phone companies and take them across the planet. So by the time I wrapped up with EDS, we had 14 major engagements in different countries, and I was spending most of my time on airplanes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
were you flying yourself at that point? Had your personal flying life started at that point?
Most of this was international, so it would be beyond what I could do. But on one of my business trips to London, I visited the Royal Air Force Museum at Hendon, saw all the classic World War II fighters, the ME-262 jet out of Germany, Messerschmitts, Hurricanes, and just fell in love with all of it and decided I needed a pilot's license. So that's where I got started.
Oh, wow. So what age were you when you started flying?
Mid-20s.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I started when I was about 18, so we both, we're still young guys, but we still,
yeah.
We got quite a bit of time in airplanes. So, well, yeah, so then talk a little bit about how you got started in aviation, where you learned, what you learned in, that sort of thing, just your starting stages of flying.
I started fairly humble, Cessna 152s out of Boca Raton.
Okay.
I remember vividly flying over the path of destruction of Hurricane Andrew in a 152 and coming back in my rental plane.
Oh, wow.
And the chief instructor asking me where I would have landed and who would have rescued me had the engine failed. And so that would pin the time frame. And those were damn good questions at the time. So I didn't really have good answers, but went from there. I remember when a Piper Arrow T-tail was the cool airplane because it had retracts and retracts with real airplanes.
Yeah.
From there, it was Cirrus SR-22s. I built a Seawind amphibian along the way. There's some good stories about that. And eventually a TBM turboprop, and now transitioning to jets.
Okay, that's cool. So before we start talking a little bit more about your career, I want to back up a little bit. You're in touch with a number of sort of the leading organizations within aviation and elsewhere as far as innovation is concerned. Both innovation in aviation and innovation outside of aviation. Talk a little bit about what those organizations are and who you're involved with.
So I'm going to spin up a video. It's part of my background story on this.
Okay.
I had built a Seawind amphibian. That's a four-place, that's the one pictured right behind me there.
Wow.
Pretty much the world's fastest seaplane. And Erik Lindbergh asked to borrow it. He wanted to film the Everglades and burning sugarcane fields. And this is actually the trailer for the New Adventures of Lindbergh. And so I met Erik, chased him in a helicopter with a flight crew. Erik and Peter Diamandis and Greg Marionek presented at Theater in the Woods at Oshkosh. And because I had met Erik, I was comfortable enough to go backstage and sign up for this thing called Xprize. they were talking about saving humanity from extinction. And I thought, that sounds pretty good. Let me go sign up. In fact, I was surprised no one else signed up at that event. But that led to the World Space Summit, planning the next 100 years of commercial spaceflight, and really changed the course of my life. So it's...
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So tell me about that aircraft again. So that's not something I'm familiar with. You built it. Did you have a couple of partners? How did that go?
So this was an experimental. I think we had the 46th flying. Sadly, when 10% of people who flew this airplane had died, I stopped flying it. The number is now about 25%.
Wow.
This is a fairly dangerous experimental. And as a first experimental build, it was a bit much. By the way, that is Erik Lindbergh. And,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
We had an environmentalist and we had a sugarcane producer. The sugarcane producer flew the helicopter. The environmentalist is pictured here. It was a great, great experience.
That is amazing.
Yep.
So, and you're still involved with Erik Lindbergh today. So talk a little bit about that and how he's involved in some of the things you're doing. And then we'll go back into some of your business pursuits.
Yeah, so skipping around just a little bit, I have an AI that's been routing fleets of aircraft. And it saves 200,000 pounds of carbon footprint a week, 7% of their operating costs. I presented this last Oshkosh and at the Lindbergh Innovation Forum, and based on the strength of that, I was asked to join the Lindbergh board. So I'm now on the board of the Lindbergh Foundation. But prior to that, I've been a film crew for Erik as he's given away the Lindbergh Electric Aircraft Prize, or LEAP. And he has been on a mission to reduce the noise, reduce the carbon footprint of aviation, even sponsored by the national parks. So to reduce the noise footprint over, say, the Grand Canyon, replace helicopters with something electric and quiet, or maybe 9-passenger short-range electric touring aircraft. Okay. Think about touring. You're going low and slow. You don't need any speed or distance. You can land and pick up more tourists and recharge the battery pack. It's not a bad target for that. So Erik and I had been working together a long time on various environmental projects, sound projects, and it was natural, one, for me to join the Lindbergh board, but two, for Erik to join our board of directors, because the mission of VERIJET is the same as the Lindbergh Foundation, the radical decarbonization and noise reduction of private flying.
Okay. Well, that's great. And before we dig more into that as well, so talk a little bit about your experience with Xprize and some of the things that you've been involved with there, or, and I'm not sure many of them relate to aviation, but to the extent they relate to aviation, that'd be great. If not, just some great innovation that you see coming from that group.
So Xprize is mind-blowing. Got to visit with Burt Rutan, launch spaceships in the desert. I'm going to tell an off story here. I asked Burt if he would design a seaplane that would be lower maintenance, not be at risk of corrosion. Explained to him the difficulties of the Seawind experiment that we did. He said, "Richard, you got me busy launching spaceships in the desert. There's no water here. I'm busy. But I would like to take partial credit, just a small amount of credit, for his retirement career, which was to build a seaplane that can handle rough water and be low maintenance." And he and his wife, Tanya, plan, I think, the circumnavigation with a seaplane, very similar to like North to the Orient, Charles and Ann Morrow, seaplane adventures, doing route proving for one trip. So I feel like I was just a little part of aviation history. Yeah?